This is the second lecture of the Theory and Practice of Cryptography Googlers Teaching Googlers series. And I'm glad to see so many people back from last week. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the issues of using cryptography in practice. And as usual, all the course materials and QDB links, slides, and video from last week are available on the wiki page, go/cryptocourse. And I'll continually post some suggested readings and homework exercises on there. I've posted exercise set 2, which is a little more hands-on, so using some of the internal tools at Google that we've built for crypto, and a little bit of exercises with attacking some crypto systems. And just to kind of recount from last week, as I said, the video is up on YouTube, so you can watch it, or if you missed last week's lecture, you can catch up. We had about, I think, 3 exercises on the first exercise set. The first one was just to sign a message with GPG and to verify my message. And on average, it took the people who did it about 20 minutes. And kind of the point of that exercise is to show that actually using the software is not very simple, even for a Google engineer. And I think that the people who actually did this, I'm going to shut this chat window here. I think the people who actually did this were a bit self-selecting because people are very interested in it and wanted to do this exercise, because when I've done it in the past at MIT in the computer security class, it took people about an hour, sometimes an hour and a half to actually do basically what you just did, which was create a PGP key and sign somebody else's and sign a message and then actually verify my message that I posted. The second exercise was finding hash collisions, and Tom Jiang found the largest truncated hash collision, which is 77 bits. So that's just kind of an exercise to get a little experience in trying to crack things and make use of some data structures. And I don't know why the chat window is popping up here. Sorry about that.
Tom Jiang did that here. I thought the record was 77 bits.
No, so actually SHA-1, there have been full collisions found as of 2 years ago. And they did that with about 2 to the 69th operations. So it's expected to take 2 to the 80th. And they found a full 160-bit collision in SHA-1 with 2 to the 69th operations. Sorry, the question again, if you're on VC, was did that actually happen here, and is that a record? And the answer is no. People ask me offline about what's the significance of finding 2 random values that collide, and versus if I had a specific value and you wanted to find a collision. The idea with having 2, being able to get 2 things that collide, even though you don't have control over the pre-image values, you might be able to get somebody to sign things. So, if somebody's signing code, for example, you might be able to take code and have an innocuous program that doesn't do anything and have some, random variables at the end. So I could keep getting Google, for example, to sign code. And then if I find a collision with one of these random, innocuous codes that they actually sign, I can replace it with my malicious code and then pad some random noise on the end. So this is kind of a chosen ciphertext attack in the hash context. Anyway, we can talk more about that offline. If you have questions, as I say in the bottom of this slide, feel free to ask me offline. Some of you did at the end of last week's lecture, and I'm not really going to get to everyone's questions. But as I said, feel free to email me directly. The other exercise was doing some cryptanalysis on these 2-time pad encrypted, and Jason Klaus actually decrypted the whole message, which was this crypto rap song called Alice and Bob. So there's a link here, and I sent it out, and you can definitely understand all the references in the song and all the in-jokes by the end of this lecture. So moving on, I'm going to actually restart this presentation because there seems to be some problem with the group chat window. Okay, so today's lecture is mainly going to focus on things that you should not do with crypto. It's going to be a lot of kind of practical things that there's the chat window again. Let's get this thing out of here. So we got regain my train of thought here. It's going to focus on things that you should not do. So it's a lot of kind of practical knowledge we've learned over the years, and a lot of things that people would intuitively use crypto may have problems with it. We're going to see a few examples of that throughout the lecture. And so by the end of the talk, I'd hope that everyone can understand all the little subtle things that can happen when using crypto, all the kind of things that you would think it would be easy, but that when you put these pieces together, they're actually can have some interactions that can create problems or be security threats. And kind of the point at the end of this is that I want to emphasize that there's a security team here that's here to help you and can answer your questions. So if you're working on a project that needs to use crypto, there's a lot of resources in-house that you can refer to, and that's our job, is basically to help you use this properly and get you what you need for your product. And finally, we've got some in-house tools that we've built. And by the end of this, you'll see that these tools can actually take care of a lot of the issues I want to present today, and will be very useful for you to use in your code. So, we learned last week, crypto is pretty easy. You guys know the primitives, you know what block ciphers are, public key crypto, hash functions, signing, and there's a ton of libraries out there that are very easy to use. There's, Java's got it built into the JCE. It's a very simple interface. There's OpenSSL, all sorts of libraries out there that, as engineers are very, straightforward to use. There's not a lot of complexity here, and you can pretty much easily use these crypto primitives. And the question is, should you? And the point I'm going to make today is that it's very easy to get this wrong. And if you get it wrong, the consequences can be very dire. It can be completely broken. You can have issues in the future. And the idea I want to drive home is that putting together all these little pieces can be very difficult in practice, because there are attacks that you may not think of intuitively. They may not be things that you're really considering at the time of designing that can come up later. So kind of the first deadly sin I want to talk about today is writing your own crypto algorithms. And I will say unequivocally, don't do this. Don't write your own crypto. And it's surprising to see how many people out there today, companies, individuals, will come up with their own proprietary crypto scheme. So remember last week we talked a bit about Kirchhoff's principle, which is the idea that the entire security of the crypto system should rest in the secret being just the key and not the actual algorithm. So there's a lot of companies out there today who will have a proprietary algorithm, and they'll tout this as a security feature that nobody knows what they're doing with their crypto. And I'm going to take the case that this is a very bad idea, that we should see what the crypto's doing, and it should be public and it should be under scrutiny, and experts should hammer on it for years, and it should go through a lot of process before it's agreed on. So we've got very good standards out there, and they're constantly under scrutiny. Things like AES went through a public competition to actually decide on it. There's researchers from all around the world working on it, and it's been continually subject to attacks. People's whole career is trying to attack this crypto system and write papers on it and then improve it and write the next crypto system. So I don't think it's going to be an issue for anyone in this room. I don't think anyone's going to go out and try to write their own cipher mode or their own block cipher or public key scheme. But if you're going to do it, don't use it in practice until it's gone through a proper vetting process, which is to publish it in a peer-reviewed conference usually, and go through a lot of rounds of kind of deliberation and actually get like a solid standard that's had a lot of peer review. So another kind of point I want to make is to avoid using obsolete or unscrutinized crypto. This kind of ties back to the first slide, and it's actually just kind of showing some due diligence. So things like DES are effectively completely broken. I mentioned last week that in 1999, somebody was able to crack DES in 24 hours for an initial investment of $100,000. So that means they could continually crack DES keys for that one-time investment. And you think that processing power is increased by Moore's law, and we've gotten better technology and better parallelization, better all sorts of things. That's going to be much faster today. So triple DES, which is basically just a composition of 3 DES operations, it's still used in a lot of legacy applications. It's still out there, especially in the financial institution. A lot of banks have 3 DES hardwired into a lot of their protocols. But this is not something that should be used for new applications. We've got a great standard in AES. It's more efficient. Has longer key lengths. It's more flexible. And there's no reason to go back and use triple DES. But there are not practical attacks against triple DES that are known in academia or in public as of now. MD5 and SHA-1, you may have heard about a lot of the collisions in the paper. Somebody asked about whether 77 bits is a record, and actually both of these people can find collisions, or people have found collisions. MD5 is actually, you can find a collision in it very quickly. You can download some code out there that can find it under a minute. And the question is, what's the implication of this? And it kind of comes back to whether you can get people to sign your chosen message that you want them to sign. So something like a certificate, something like code signing. You don't want somebody to sign that with DSA with MD5. Remember last week we talked about using message digests with a signature scheme. In that case, it's not appropriate for that because somebody can get you to sign two things. One of them is innocuous, one of them is malicious, and they can give you, they can get you to collide on MD5 values. However, MD5 is still, as far as I know, okay for HMACs. And the reason why there is that you can't get people to necessarily sign for it. And we talk about this more offline, but generally HMACs are okay for MD5 and SHA-1. Finally, the last thing on here is, I haven't mentioned it yet in the course, is TEA. This stands for a tiny encryption algorithm. And this has been used in practice, and I'll talk about it some more today, but there's some attacks against it, and there's been some revisions to it. And the one concern I have about it personally is that it hasn't had the same level of scrutiny as other things out there, and the fact that people keep finding these, not crucial attacks, but small attacks that keep whittling down the strength of TA. So, third point I want to make is to use reasonable key lengths. So I've pulled these numbers down from the site keylengths.com, and they've compiled a bunch of different standards. It's NIST, it's the NSA, European eCrypt, and they have a bunch of different things you can look at, kind of key length recommendations. And for the foreseeable future, 256-bit AES is thought to be strong. This is the U.S. government's top secret standard. It's what they're using for their most vital secrets in government. SHA-256 is another SHA standard that's thought to be secure for the foreseeable future. 4096-bit RSA DSA. This is based on the difficulty of actually factoring large numbers. And something I haven't talked about at all is elliptic curve cryptography, which is much shorter keys, and 512-bit keys are thought to be secure for the future, foreseeable future. For kind of the current standards that we're using, usually the measurement they'll use is that you'll think about encrypting something today and how long you want that protected for. So you notice that I have things that are protected for about 25 years until about 2030, 23 years. And AES 128, which is the government's secret for secret level clearance, that's thought to be things you encrypt today. You could think that in 30 years this is going to still be protected, and sometime between then you would anticipate that you're going to increase your key sizes. Same goes for using SHA-1 for HMACs and 2048-bit RSA DSA and 256-bit ECC. Things that are kind of at the end of their lifetime right now are triple DES, SHA-1 for signatures. As we said, people have found collisions with a lot of computation, but that's going to come down as they have more attacks. And 1024-bit RSA DSA. Kind of the recommendation now is to sunset 1024-bit RSA keys and move on to higher keys within the next couple of years, or larger keys within the next couple of years. And these are details that you can refer back to the slide or look at that site later on. But the idea is that you should just use reasonable key lengths, and this goes in both directions. You can have people, you might think that, hey, let's just use huge RSA keys and let's use huge AES keys. And the problem there is that there's still a performance issue. These are not necessarily inexpensive operations, and there's a trade-off between performance and speed and security. So you can kind of go both directions. You can use short keys that are too short and weak, or you can go overboard and affect your performance and make your security unusable by using a huge key. So kind of moving on to the next point I want to make is not to misuse primitives. And the idea here is that we've got block ciphers and hashes and all these different things. And you might think that there are ways to compose these primitives out of each other. So I might build a MAC out of a block cipher. And the idea there is that if you and I share a secret, maybe I just encrypt something and then you can verify that you encrypted the same value. And people can do this. You can compose MACs out of block ciphers. There's one, you can make them out of AES, DES, and all these things. But it's not trivial to do. You actually have to put some thought into how it's constructed, and there's attacks you can do against it. So a great example of somebody misusing a primitive and trying to use for example, a cipher for a hash is Microsoft. So part of their copy protection scheme in the original Xbox, they used TEA as a hash function. And the idea was that they would, this is for code signing, so they would, excuse me, they would use this block cipher to compute some value and treat it like a one-way hash. Now the problem is that, well, there's two issues. One is that there was known vulnerabilities in TEA, and that was not supposed to be used for cipher or for hash functions. And they were misusing it in the wrong way to actually compute this hash function. So because of that, people could figure out how to get collisions very easily on the code that was signed by the Xbox, inside the Xbox. And there was a talk here on this about a year ago that was very interesting. There's a site out there with kind of talks about all the things. I should actually send a link to it. But the point here is that because Microsoft did two things, they didn't do their research and find out that T had these vulnerabilities, and they kind of misused the wrong tool for the wrong job. People are able to boot Linux on their Xbox. They could circumvent the bootloader. And so it's just kind of a case study to show the pitfalls of actually trying to do this on your own. And kind of the concerning thing here is that Microsoft employs some very good cryptographers. They have very good security people, talented people who know this. And so it's something we can learn as an organization to make sure that we talk to each other, because somewhere there's an Xbox engineer who looked up the phrase tiny encryption algorithm, and this is the first thing that came up, and they used it. And they didn't go do their due diligence and find out that, oh wait, there's these subtle attacks and these things. So, the point here also is that we should use the resources we have in-house, because Microsoft, they have people there who knew better than to use this in Xbox. So next point, and I'm kind of jumping around, this is a bit of a mishmash of points, is to use a good source of randomness. So we talk a lot about generating secret keys and generating initialization vectors. I'll talk about in a minute. But it's important to use a good source of randomness. So we have a lot of them. And for all practical purposes, dev/random, dev/urandom are good for what we're going to do on a daily basis. We also have Java Security Secure Random, some in-house tools under util random, and our own Java Secure Random package. And all of these, in my opinion, are acceptable for use. And there's some caveats. So dev random is blocking, and so it might be an issue in your code. Another one is to consider forward security. And forward security is this idea that if at some point in the future my key generation algorithm is broken, like somebody leaks the key that's being used or the seed to a pseudo-random number generator, you don't want to go back and you don't want to go and compromise all your old keys that were generated by that same generator. So we actually have a forward secure random number generator in our own utilities. And again, this is something you can talk to a security team in-house and see what's right for your particular application and project. Now, some weak sources that have been used in practice a lot are things like time of day and just the C random call, and Java util random, which is weak, and LFSR stands for linear feedback shift register. These are just easily reversible functions that people have used for generating randomness. And a lot of people, again, just will make up something. They'll grab some disk noise, they'll grab some keyboard clicks, and they'll try to jumble it together and make up their own source of randomness. And again, this is not something you should roll on your own. Now, the time of day is a great example. There's a anecdote in Las Vegas. There's a Keno game, and this guy started winning. He won for like 3 days in a row, won like $300,000 playing Keno. And then they finally shut him down. They're trying to figure out what he was doing. Was he cheating? Had he paid somebody off? And it turns out that every night they were turning off their Keno machine, and then they'd flip it on about the same time in the morning, and it would seed itself off the time of day. So then it would generate numbers throughout the day, and then they would come up again. So this guy played a lot of Keno and realized that he saw the same patterns come up a couple times, and then figured out that if he just recorded all the games that were being played, they would be played again. And they took him to court, and he won because he wasn't cheating. It was their fault for seeding their game off the time of day. And you would be surprised at how much this is still out there. People use the Unix random call. They use this. They make up an LFSR. And again, we have plenty of tools out there. There's no reason to use a weak source of randomness. So another big point is not to neglect key rotation. And I've got kind of a Donald Rumsfeld quote here, like stuff happens. Keys are leaked. There's algorithms are broken. Processing power gets better. And you can basically, from the ground one, plan to change your keys. And if this is for signing keys, you need to be able to go revoke all your old things you signed. If it's for encrypted database, you may need to go through and re-encrypt your database with your new keys. And you're going to have to be able to identify which key was used to encrypt different signatures or ciphertexts. And this is something that people, again, neglect a lot. They will generate one key and think that it's not going to change for a long time, think it's going to be used for a long time. And generally, a good rule of thumb is you should plan to rotate keys maybe annually or quarterly. Some people would say daily, but I think that's overkill personally. But this should be built into your design from day one, that you expect to change keys. It's not going to disrupt your application. It's not going to be anything that's going to break anything just to change a key value. Which brings me up to the second point is don't keep your keys in source code. This makes it very difficult to change the key. If it's encoded in there as a binary string, you need to go recompile your code and push out a new binary just to update the key. We actually have a project right now to go remove these keys from code, and it's on this wiki link. And we're basically compiling a list of any keys that people have hard-coded in code. And there are exceptions to this where if you have test keys or if they're just legacy keys that are in there that are not being used for security purposes. For example, a lot of people have used Max, HMAX, just for integrity checking. They don't care about people trying to forge things. It's just like they'd use a CRC. And things like that, it's acceptable. But generally, you want your keys to be in a separate data file that is independent of your source code, that you can update independently, that your source code will read from. And we'll talk about some tools to do this at the end of the talk. So my next kind of point is to use the right cipher mode. And what's a cipher mode? We haven't really talked about this yet. And we've got these primitives, block ciphers, hash functions, and cipher modes are the way that you put together these block ciphers over a large message. So for example, here we've got this block cipher encryption. In this case, say AES or DES. And if you have a big long plaintext that's bigger than the input size of your block cipher, kind of the intuitive thing is just to go along and just run this block cipher along every piece of that message. It seems pretty straightforward, and you obviously probably see some problems with it in that the patterns in the original plaintext are going to be apparent in the ciphertext. So a great example of this is, I grabbed these from Wikipedia pages, is this image. So the image on your left is a plaintext image that has been encrypted by ECB mode in the center. And you can see that the patterns in the original image are just pretty transparently shown through in the output. And the far right would be the ciphertext that's encrypted under a different cipher block mode. And the idea here is that just like this attack some of you did on the exercise where you looked at the output and you try to do some cryptanalysis, this is obviously easy to see, but maybe you could get away with it with a large text message that has some decent entropy in it. Maybe you could say, okay, well, you're not really going to see patterns. But the fact is that cryptanalysis is about seeing patterns in there, and using the wrong mode can make it easier for some types of data. So ECB should only be used for very short blocks where you don't care if it's deterministic. You don't care if people recognize this particular encrypted block. And so one example might be if you had user IDs. If you had user IDs counting up from 0 to your number of users, and maybe we just want to hide how many users we have. So if that might be a long, you can encrypt it with AES. The output, people are going to see the same encrypted user number, but it's not telling you how many users there are. So that's the kind of application where ECB would be appropriate. Just to give you some context for other cipher block modes, this is one that's used often. It's called CBC. This is a chaining block cipher. And the chaining idea is a little hard to see on the slide, but I should probably use my mouse. You have this initialization vector value. And this is just a random blob that you can generate for every encryption. And you XOR this with your plaintext, right? The first block of plaintext, and encrypt that. And then the chaining part is that that ciphertext is going to be used as the IV for the next block. So one way to look at this is you just pad the beginning of the message with a random block, which is the IV, and then do this chaining step. And the nice part about this is that every time you encrypt, the output is going to be different because this IV is changing. And if you look back in that previous slide where we have this picture, that's the kind of output you're going to get, is that because you have the same pattern of blocks that are being encrypted here, they're not going to be apparent in the output. So CBC is one mode, and one drawback is that this is fixed size. You need to actually pad the end of the plain text. Another mode that is commonly used is called counter mode, and it's a very simple idea. It's basically your initialization vector is going to be part of your input. It's the first half of your input block, and the second half is just a counter. It's going to count up from 0 to the length of your message, and you'll just encrypt these blocks and then XOR them with your plain text. So the nice part about this is you can do it in parallel. It can be the length of your plain text, but again, you have to make sure to use these correctly. Whoops. So one issue with this is not to reuse your initialization vectors. So if you think about using counter mode, what's going to happen if we reuse the same initialization vector? Well, these nonce values are going to be the same. The counter values are going to be the same. So the ciphertext is going to be the same. And we've got basically that 2-time pad from the homework assignment. It's exactly the same thing. So if you reuse the IV, you can do the same attacks that you could do on the first exercise set to actually recover the plain text. So don't reuse IVs. That's another kind of like walkaway point. I don't know why this chat window keeps opening. If there's anybody from the docs team here, please take a note of that, and then you can fix it. Okay, so don't reuse IVs. Similar issue is, we haven't talked about it, but there's things called stream ciphers. And as you probably guessed, these are ciphers that are not blocks, and they can just encrypt a stream of arbitrary length data. And again, it's basically a function whose output is XORed with the plain text. And reusing the keys for a stream cipher has the exact same attack. It's the 2-time pad all over again. And you'd think that, yeah, this seems pretty obvious, but this happens a lot. The WEP, the WEP wireless protocol, had an issue with people reusing stream cipher keys. They were using a stream cipher. This is kind of two cases. They're using a stream cipher to do macking. So it's, again, using the primitive for the right primitive for the right job. They're using a stream cipher for macking, and then they were also reusing the keys for it. So people could do attacks against the authentication of the WEP wireless protocol. And again, the people who designed this should have known better. It was IEEE guys, and this is just a misuse of crypto that they should have caught. And later wireless standards use more secure crypto and properly use it. Another point: sign all ciphertext. As with when I was talking about before, this issue with hash collisions, where you can get people to sign things for you. That's kind of a chosen ciphertext attack there. And the idea is that I might be able to give you, some data and get you to decrypt it. And the issue here is that by getting you to decrypt things, I might be able to tweak either the IV or parts of the ciphertext and do things to reveal the message to me. So the idea is here, we want to ensure that all ciphertexts have not been manipulated. And so you want to sign both the IV and the ciphertext and any other sort of input that actually went into generating the ciphertext. So you should never use encryption unless it's authenticated. That should be the default. Because if there's unauthenticated things out there, we open up a whole class of attacks where you can, basically manipulate the ciphertext and do things to it. And some things people try to rely on is just saying, okay, well, we'll detect the changes in the plain text when you decrypt and things like that. Maybe having a CRC check within the plain text. And there's attacks against that. So unless it's a actual signature or HMAC, it's very difficult to guarantee that you're not susceptible to some of these cryptanalysis attacks. Now, one thing is I say sign all ciphertext. Why not sign before you encrypt? And this is kind of a very theoretical attack, but there's vulnerabilities by signing first. So in practice, we like to encrypt first, then sign. And this is very minute, detail, and you can get away with it in some cases. There are also things, there's authenticated cipher block modes that you can use where signing happens automatically as you encrypt. So there's a lot of kind of exceptions to this rule, but generally sign all ciphertexts. Another issue is padding and encoding your plaintext properly. So the idea here is that you may be able to do attacks against the padding scheme or the encoding scheme in a ciphertext. So this comes back to signing, is that I might be able to manipulate a ciphertext or generate my own that when you decrypt it and you actually take your action on it, because of vulnerabilities in your padding or your decoding, I can maybe reveal your secrets, or I can reveal your message contents or authenticate myself. And a good example is I have this paper linked on the wiki about the web authentication. So back a few years ago, the Wall Street Journal had these paid accounts, and they would basically take your username and some sort of secret and hash them together, and that would be your cookie. Now the problem is though is that they didn't properly pad this username. They actually just truncated it down to 8 bytes. So if your name was, Joe Blow 123, somebody could log in as Joe Blow 1234 and it would get truncated down to Joe Blow 123. So this is more of a data impact format, but there's other attacks against padding. And so that would allow somebody to basically, log in as somebody else's account by getting the site to, take their username and hash it down to the cookie value they needed to log in as somebody else. And you can read the paper to get, all the details about how they do that and the ways that they actually would, fight that. Another issue are RSA certificate forgeries, and this came out at a conference a couple of years ago. And again, it's this padding issue. And basically, I'm trying to remember the details on the spot here. There's an issue with the delimiter in the certificate. So we talked about certificates the first week. This is basically somebody's public key that's been signed by somebody else, like VeriSign. And for certain RSA keys, what you could do is create a certificate that you could take advantage of a implementation error in the way that they parse the certificate, and when they actually sign it, you could have that valid certificate to like your friendly site actually be for some malware site, because you can manipulate the actual values in their certificate. So I also have the link for that. You can read more about it, but there's a lot of cases where the scheme can break down because people don't encode or pad the data correctly. So another, again, jumping topics a bit here, are to use nonces properly. So one thing to think about with RSA in particular is that it's not what's called semantically secure. And we're going to talk about what semantically secure is more next week, but basically there's no randomness in the encryption. If I encrypt the same message twice, the output ciphertext looks the same. So we get back to that kind of ECB problem where if I encrypt every block of the picture with my key, you get that picture of the penguin coming through. So kind of an intuitive idea is, hey, let's just pad the plain text with a random string. So I take my message in a random string and encrypt that instead of just the message. And that seems like a good idea. The problem is, though, is that as intuitive as it is, there are attacks against that. And some of them are more difficult, and some of them require some different assumptions. But by just by just appending strings together, especially for RSA and some other ciphertext schemes, you're maybe opening yourself up to vulnerabilities. So one way that they actually, one particular scheme that randomizes is called OAEP. And the construction of this is pretty non-trivial. They actually have to do a lot of steps to ensure that this isn't vulnerable to attacks, or people can tell what message it is. And these attacks are called chosen plaintext attacks. And the idea is that you choose the plaintext and encrypt it and can see what the output looks like. And it's non-trivial to actually construct these. So kind of the point here is don't just think, hey, I'll slap in some random nonce there and then I'll be fine, I'll look random, because there can be attacks against that. Similar issue comes up with using keys in the same way. So one idea that a lot of people have, and again this comes back to actually building your primitives, is keyed hash functions, or HMAX, hash max. And one idea you might have is say, hey, we've got SHA-1. Let's make this a MAC. Let's just take a key, tack on the message at the end and hash that. And then if you've got the same key, you can compute the same function over the message. And again, there's attacks against that. That can be particular to that hash function scheme. It can be in general to the the theoretical notion of a hash function. And getting it right is non-trivial. So one standard that I've actually linked to both these on the wiki as well is HMAC. And so they do a construction that there's some thought and detail that goes into there, and some very minute things that they have to get right to do this properly. And going back to OAPs, they actually had to do a couple stabs at this. They published a paper, and then going through this process found some vulnerabilities into it, and then had to go back and revise it and come out with another version. So that even the experts who do this for a living in academia, they can make mistakes. And that's why this whole process exists to kind of publish it and then do revisions, is that it's very difficult to do. So again, like nonces, don't think that you can just take a hash function or a MAC or Cipher and throw in a key somewhere and then it'll now be some sort of keyed thing. Usually whatever you need, there is already a construction out there to do it, and you just need to know what to look for. Another point is not to use encrypting keys for signing keys or vice versa. And again, this comes back to this attack where you can get somebody to encrypt something or sign something on your behalf, or if you think of like the email context, I might send you an email and then you hit reply and then sign that message. Well, the contents of the message, some of that's determined by me. So the idea here is, this is actually part of the exercise, is that you can do attacks against some encryption schemes, signing schemes, by getting people to sign a particular message. So the example in the exercise is with RSA, where I might have my RSA key to encrypt messages to you, and then I'm also signing your certificate with the same key. So if you give me a certificate to sign, you might be able to do attacks against it. And there's obviously a kind of trivial one, but there's a more subtle one that you can actually not detect as the person signing it, and you'll kind of figure that out in the exercises. And yeah, so basically the same key shouldn't be used for signing and encrypting. This applies to AES. Some people try to reuse AES keys for MAC keys, and there are more attacks against that because it's the same issue of the signature may actually leak some information about the key, but generally should be totally separate. They should never kind of cross this boundary. And again, there are some exceptions with things called signed encryption and authenticated block cipher modes. And so there are cases where it is acceptable where you'd have just one key, but in general, two separate worlds. Another issue, side channel attacks. And this is more, depending on the platform, but I'll talk about some things that are actually relevant to kind of the PC model as well. And what you're looking at here is a trace of the actual power consumption of a DES operation. So DES has 16 rounds, and you see these spikes going up and down. And this is actually a smart card consuming power. And the interesting thing here is that the shape of this curve can tell you what's going on inside this card. So this bottom picture, so if you notice the scale is different, this is zoomed in on, I think, like one of these rounds here. And so there's some patterns here. There's kind of the shape is the same, but there's these two spikes down here versus one spike over here. And what this actually is they've been able to zoom in and see operations like shifting a register. And based on this implementation, they knew that these shift operations would happen for specific key values. And so by just looking at this trace, without attacking DES at all, they can extract the key just by looking at how much power this thing's consuming. Now the same thing happens with timing attacks. RSA is, you can look at the time things take to respond to try to determine what the key values are. And RSA is one thing that's susceptible to this. This last summer, we had an intern in the security group who did attacks on cache timing. So the idea is that when somebody be doing RSA computations, this is an expensive computation, and they would be doing exponentiation over large fields, and they'd have a lot of pre-computation tables. And when they'd hit certain parts of the table, it would cache it into different lines in the cache block. And so depending on what your secret key value was, different cache blocks would get filled with this pre-computed data. And so what her project was to write a program that would basically try to flush out the cache and then see the response time when reading her data back out of the cache. And so, it's on a multi-threaded machine, so there's the process that she can't touch that's running some RSA computation. Her process is just in her own user space. And what it would do is, try to write a bunch of stuff to the cache, and then the RSA would run for a while. And then she'd come back and try to read her things from the cache and time how long it took to actually get her data out. And the things that took a long time, they were flushed from the cache. And so she spent the summer looking at traces like this that were three-dimensional or two-dimensional, like cache lines and time response. And at the end of it, she figured out that she could determine the RSA secret key that was in use by looking at how long the cache response times were. And so there's not a lot you can do as this from an engineer because it's kind of dependent on the implementation. But one thing to take away from it is that, all of you right now could go fire up Python or Java and write RSA in like 20 minutes. It's very easy to do. But things like OpenSSL and to some extent the JC, they've thought about things like timing attacks, especially OpenSSL. And, the woman who's an intern last summer is actually attacking OpenSSL. And this is after they've already addressed this problem. So she found an attack against things that they've already supposedly fixed. So kind of the idea here goes back to don't roll your own, use standard libraries, use standard implementations. Because they've thought about things like timing attacks, side channel attacks, power analysis, things like that. Very subtle details that aren't clear on the surface. And it was years before people actually thought of doing this. This is just in the 90s. So one of the last points I want to make is don't fixate too much on the crypto in a secure system. We get in these email threads sometimes that people will go back for 100 messages talking about what to use as their source of random bits, disk reads and keyboard clicks, and just going back and forth about attacking, urandom and don't use AES on 28, use AES 256. And the thing is that usually the crypto is not going to be the weakest link. Usually crypto, people don't attack it. They're not going to go brute force crypto. They're going to work around it. And the kind of phrase that Bruce Schneier used once, and he's a big crypto guy, is it's like putting a bank vault door on a tent. And you could have the most powerful, strong key crypto algorithm there, but it's the rest of the system that people are going to attack. They're going to look for the weakest link. And it's very rare that you see attacks directly against the crypto algorithm or brute force attacks. Very rare that ever happens. Usually it's in the integration. So things like I talked about WEP and the Wall Street Journal cookies and Xbox, all these things, they weren't attacks against, well, Xbox is an exception, they weren't attacks against the algorithms, they were how they were actually being used and how they were put together. And these are hard lessons that we've learned. These are not, it's taken 25 years of crypto papers to start thinking about these attacks. So it's not that people don't know how to use, people are stupid and can't figure out crypto. It's that these are subtle and these are hard to figure out, and they take a lot of time sometimes to figure out these attacks, and they're not always apparent. So taking away from this is that crypto is just one part of a whole system. It's not the end-all be-all of security. Encrypting things is great. Like, an example might be if you're storing files on disk, but it brings up all these other questions of where you're storing your secret keys and who's got admin rights and, is this patched up? And the whole system security needs to be looked at. And, this is especially kind of, on blogs and things like that, people will get focused on key lengths and which algorithm you're using and what hash you're using. And it's important, but it's just one part of a whole system. So one final thing is snake oil. So if you go on the internet, there's a ton of crypto libraries out there. And I've kind of taken these from Bruce Schneier. I got a couple links on the wiki. But some warning signs of snake oil crypto. One is that they'll make a lot of pseudoscience claims. They'll say this is a new field of math. This is a new thing that we're basing our crypto on. And generally, if it's not published in a peer-reviewed paper in a crypto conference, I'm very skeptical, whether this is legit. And this comes back to this idea of having the algorithm public, having it open. And if somebody makes some pseudoscience sounding claims, they may sound convincing, but if this paper hasn't been published, I really don't believe that this thing is solid. This idea of, a lot of times people will say that's based on some new mathematical field. So one experience I had as a grad student was this guy contacts me. He's like, oh, we've got this new crypto scheme, and it's based on chaos theory, and comes in and makes me sign an NDA. And I look at him like, well, this isn't secure. It's not, here's some issues with it, and it's not really an improvement. And he kind of ignored what I said. And then later on, Bruce Schneier does this great thing where every month he has a newsletter and might have a company that's in the doghouse for making these snake oil claims. And these guys ended up on there. So I felt kind of vindicated that I was not dismissing the next great technology. But yeah, you'll see it. They'll say it's on chaos, on who knows, neural net, whatever. Generally, it's very hard for somebody to make a transition from some mathematical field, group theory, whatever, to being used in crypto. There's some exceptions, which is why I have a star there. Some things are lattice work. In the 90s, there's some crypto schemes based on lattices that are held up pretty well for about the last 10 years, and kind of the jury's still out on them. Another thing is pairing-based crypto, which is very released in the last 5 years or so. And these are kind of new applications of math and crypto, so they do happen. But again, this is kind of a warning sign. Proprietary technology, we talked about. People who won't show you the source code, that's secret, they make you sign an NDA. Very skeptical with crypto. Kind of clueless claims, like they don't make any sense what they're saying. Huge key lengths. So some of these things, they'll say our key is 6 megabytes, and things like that, or just kind of things that don't match up. If the key is bigger than RSA keys, I'm very skeptical. It's kind of substantiated claims. They'll say, this is claimed by security professionals. Like who are they talking about? Who reviewed this? Proof of security. Now I've got a star on this because some of these companies will say it's provenly secure, it's unbreakable, blah blah blah, and then in the theory of crypto world, there are people who do security proofs, and we're going to talk about what that means next week. And even within the crypto community, there's kind of a war going on right now between Neil Koblitz, who's a guy who designed elliptic curve cryptography, and some other cryptographers, Oded Goldreich and Boaz Barak. And so these are just they're kind of going back and forth about what it actually means to be a proof. And so Neil Koblitz is kind of a mathematician, and he's saying, cryptographers, their proofs don't mean anything, and he's kind of attacking it. And they're saying, you need to do this proof of security. And this has been kind of going on in the open the last couple of months. So it's kind of like, what does it actually mean to be secure? What does it mean to prove something secure? That's still something that's being worked out among academics. Cracking contests. And again, I've got a star here, and because you've seen RSA cracking contests, you've seen DES cracking contests, but these are kind of different because these snake oil companies will use that as the basis of their security. Like one of them, they're giving away a Humvee, and that was their basis of security. They're like, we've had a Humvee, giveaway for a year, and no one's claimed it, no one can decrypt this message, and that was their argument. Versus the RSA contest, they were doing that to establish the state of the art, how good people were at factoring numbers, and how powerful the algorithm still remained after the years. So cracking contests, I would say generally, it's a warning sign, but it depends what the motivation is. And finally, one-time pads. We talked about this last week about some of the issues with one-time pads, and I'll show you an example in a sec. But one good question to ask, and next week we'll say what this means, is just ask if it's semantically secure. If the person has no clue what you're talking about, their crypto scheme is not good. If they're able to answer it kind of meaningfully, then maybe they get their foot in the door and you can look at it some more. And we'll talk about what that means later. And it's kind of an interesting way of defining security for crypto schemes. So as an example, unresponsive script. I grabbed this from one of the doghouse things, and they're selling it for $7.50. So you could buy this, and I'll just read some of the excerpts. Most file encryptors use messages that rely on the theory of computational security. That is the difficulty of key factorization prevents decryption of the file. This bar keeps raising as computer power increases. Product X is designed to use conventional XOR encryption on keys that are the same size as the file to be encrypted. This is known as the one-time pad and is completely unbreakable even to computers 1,000 years from now. This is the kind of stuff that people are actually trying to sell as products, and there's dozens of people out there trying to pass off XOR as the next big crypto thing out there. And so the reason why I have this whole snake oil slide is that it comes up again and again, and you start looking at it and you'll grow more and more skeptical as you see crypto schemes out there. So pretty much wrapped up for today. I just want to drive home the point. If you want to use crypto in your code, talk to the security team. We've got the tools, we've got the experience, and if we don't have what you need, we can build it for you. Another thing is, this is part of the exercise, is we've got an in-house library called KeyMaster, and I work on that. And part of the exercise is actually doing some stuff with KeyMaster, generating keys, using it to encrypt, verifying a URL. And it's an ongoing project. It's kind of a work in progress. And I would appreciate any feedback you have on the documentation. It's kind of still being worked on. And if anyone's interested in working as a potential 20% project, please feel free to contact me. One note too, this will be open sourced, hopefully within the next year. So right now, we're going to take our existing library and then translate into something that can be shared with everybody because it's a very useful tool. And one thing KeyMaster does is basically tackles a lot of the things we've talked about today. Signs ciphertexts, has key rotation built in, uses the right modes, uses right random sources, right IVs. So all these things we talked about today, one thing that's nice about KeyMaster is it kind of puts it under the hood and gives the programmer an easy interface. So you don't need to touch keys, you don't need to generate IVs, it just happens and does it behind the scenes, and you don't need to worry about it. And it's got key rotation built in, so a lot of the things that we talked about, you are not going to have an issue with in your code. Anyway, that's all I have today, and I'd like to open up to questions, and I'll try to remember to repeat the question because I had some complaints about that last week. Yes?
So you said don't sign and encrypt with the same key. This is the default behavior though in GPG and PGP, isn't it?
So the question is, I said do not sign and encrypt with the same key, and is that the default behavior in GPG, PGP? I believe they actually generate two keys and treat them as one key object. So when I did it, they had an Elgamal key and that was for the encryption. I can't remember. They may have had a DSA key for the signing. So right.
So it is actually two keys in a key.
Yes.
It's not a single.
Yeah.
There's something.
Yes.
Can you summarize the patent status for RSA?
The question is, can I summarize the patent stats for RSA? RSA is out of patent, and it has been since maybe 2000, but it's in the clear. Some of the things, I think OAEP, I'm pretty sure that's not patent protected, and most of these patents have expired. AES is a government standard, no patent. SHA-1, government standard, no patent. Same with DSA. Yeah, pretty much all the major crypto things have no patents on it. RSA definitely is out of patent protection. Yes? This is a very good question about exporting crypto technology. And as of, I believe it was also 2000, maybe 98, before that, crypto was considered a munition. So you used to see T-shirts that said this T-shirt is a munition because it had crypto code on there. And it was illegal to export crypto source code on a disk, but you could export it in book format. So Phil Zimmerman, the guy who wrote PGP, wrote a book that was just source code and had it in a very scannable format and then shipped it to Europe, and that was totally legal. Today in the US, you can export crypto, strong crypto, to any country that's not on the state sponsors of terrorism list. I think there's 5 left, which actually has come up here that we do hire people from Cuba, from Syria, and it is an issue if they're a national of those countries that, what is actually giving them, what is exporting. Other countries, it really varies. EU is pretty liberalized. There are some countries where it's very restrictive. Saudi Arabia, I believe I may be wrong in this, but at one point in time, I think it was illegal to use encryption or encrypt internet traffic, and I'm not positive on that, so don't quote me. But yeah, it varies around the world, and there is I think it's EPIC, it's a group that they publish annually a survey of crypto laws around the country, some sort of internet freedom survey. Yes?
So is pure RSA used any longer, or is it usually some Elgamal or some variation on the finite fields?
So the question is kind of vanilla RSA, the textbook, used anymore in practice? And the answer is not really. I mean, it's always used in conjunction with some sort of padding scheme, whether there's one called PSS and OAEP. Well, we always use it in conjunction with some padding scheme. I'm sure there's people out there who just use it vanilla. And for signing, it's used in conjunction with, a message digest. You mentioned Elgamal. Elgamal is a different crypto scheme, so it's kind of independent of RSA, and we're actually going to talk a little bit about Elgamal next week because it's really cool crypto scheme. Okay, good question. What's quantum cryptography? And quantum comes up in two different contexts, and so quantum cryptography is actually encrypting things in transit, and it makes use of kind of quantum properties of photons. So the idea that I can't measure this photon, by the act of measuring it, it might change its value. And it's pretty interesting. You can actually, it's a pretty simple idea. Is basically you polarize photons in two different orientations to be ones and zeros, and the person who knows the secret key can read them in the proper orientations because they kind of slide through without actually changing it. If you don't know the key and you try to measure it, it's kind of this quantum property where you may change the value and actually not know, whether you change the value or whether that's the right value. So the interesting thing with quantum crypto is that you can detect when people even try to eavesdrop. And so recently there's a thing in Switzerland where they had built this on for their elections, and it's a little bit of a hype. Somebody, said it was like using an armored truck to deliver like a postcard. Like at the end of it really matters what's happening on the tabulation. Like using this in transit doesn't really make much sense. But as of today, I think they can do quantum crypto over fiber optics at like 80 miles or something like that. And I don't really see it having a lot of practical uses outside of like maybe government institutions for quite a while. Just because, it buys you this in-transit security. It's not actually, on disk or anything. The other thing that quantum comes up with that you hear about a lot is factoring. So RSA is based on the difficulty of factoring large numbers. The modulus is two large primes. And we don't know how to do this fast in classical computing, but there is a fast way to do it in a quantum computing model. And it's really one of the two algorithms that put quantum on the map. Peter Shor came up with this in I think the early 90s. And basically you can factor in quantum computers. And so if we could build a big quantum computer with a lot of qubits, then RSA can be effectively broken. The problem is that having a lot of qubits in a quantum computer, they interact with each other. And so I think last I read, somebody built a quantum computer with 4 bits and factored the number 15. So don't use 15 as your RSA modulus. But this could be reality. People are making advances in it every day, and in 20 years RSA might be effectively dead. I don't think this affects things that are based on discrete logs. So Elgamal, the Diffie-Hellman key exchange we talked about last week. I'm unaware of any implications that quantum has on that. But yeah, so those are kind of two big quantum crypto issues. Are there other questions? All right, thank you very much, everybody. And next week we'll talk about some theory. And I think the plan for the final week, I've actually invited a guest speaker to talk about crypto voting protocols. It's really cool to talk about things like visual cryptography, scratch and vote, mixed nets, all sorts of stuff. It should be a fun talk, and it's not going to be technical, kind of like the level of last week. So if you're not engineer, not into the math side, that's fine. It'll be a really interesting talk. So that's 2 weeks. Next week is theory, proof, security definitions, and things like that. So thank you.